Good evening, and welcome to the Filmmakers Co-op, the new American cinema group. We're the oldest, largest distributor, exhibitor of avant-garde, underground, experimental cinema, personal vision cinema. It was founded, incorporated July 14th, 1961, as part of the counterculture movement, free expression, and personal vision. And we're celebrating almost 60 years. It's unbelievable that it existed and is thriving in this world. And it's important to have Cooperative survive. My name's Sarah. I'm the director. I'm a filmmaker, and it's a pleasure being here. We're in the co-op office. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Julia. I work for the co-op.
And I'm Ian. I also work for the co-op.
And this is the co-op's office. And all of our digital media is here, and our 5,000 films. So it's great that we're celebrating by showing the films of Roberta Cantow, because Roberta has her two films are about personal vision, about people, and she is a filmmaker and a storyteller. She received a New York Emmy for her film Clothesline, and about the symbolic and artistic role of laundry in women's lives. Her films and videos have garnered several best of category citations from around the world, and Roberta has made a decision to step away from documentary filmmaking and pursue both digital and live storytelling. So what I'm going to do is have Roberta introduce the program, her two amazing films that are on VOD. I highly recommend you see them. Roberta, do you want to introduce the panel?
Sure.
Tonight's program.
Yeah, I am very happy to introduce Elena Rossi Snook from the New York Public Library Reserve Film and Video Collection. Elena came into my life when the Donnell Library in New York City, the Donnell Media Library, was working on preservation possibilities with certain of their collection, and that was the beginning. That was our beginning. She's been a champion of my work for all these years, a great support. It is an honor for me that she has agreed to participate, and I would like to now introduce Elena Rossi Snook.
Oh, thank you, Roberta. Thanks to you for making these films, and to the co-op for having this panel, and congratulations to the co-op on your anniversary. I don't think there is New York film culture without the tent pole that is the Filmmakers Co-op and what you represent, and making viable a possibility for lucrative, even in the avant-garde, even in the counterculture, to be able to have a possibility for distribution outside of the Hollywood industrial complex is a treasure. So thank you for that. And Roberta, you and I speak endlessly about my love of your filmmaking, especially with these two films. So I am thrilled to be able to share our thoughts and conversation with this group. So let's, I think, start, right? We have some simple questions for me to pose to you. We have some more complex things. I think we should start with the easy ones, right? Because
Well, before you do, let me interrupt you, because what you had said previously, that we said we should be sure to put on, get it recorded. As thankful as I was that you had phrased it the way you did, I would actually like to understand more what you were saying, or why you feel the way you do.
okay.
Is that a fair question for
That
me
is
to
a fair
ask you?
question. So, and I'll give some background context. So I started at the New York Public Library as a preservation specialist. And so we had a bunch of money that came from the Carnegie Corporation of New York. And unlike other archives that have film negatives, and you just need the funding and the workflow to see that those films are sent to the lab, we actually had prints, but no negatives. So we spent the first 2 years just tracking down filmmakers, labs, old distributors, tracking down what distribution library went where. And it was in that process that I became familiar with If This Ain't Heaven and Clotheslines, because those were on the list. All the librarians agreed that these two films should be on our preservation list. And so my intersection with Roberta's filmmaking happened, admittedly, at a very impressionable stage in my life. I was 20 years old and I had just moved to New York in a way that to me feels very mid-century. You know, I got an apartment share in the village and I moved down with all of my worldly possessions in the back of my mom's car, and boom, I was in New York City in the summer. And so seeking out forms of expression that mirror how you feel and how you see at an age, you know, if we talk about like the protracted adolescence, you know, like certainly I was still a teenager, even though I was 20 years old. And so very much seeking out works and artists who could put into words and phrases and aesthetic that which I was feeling, which feels like a very teenage, you know, angst kind of thing. And so we were screening Clotheslines, and I found it remarkable. First of all, following a number of films that we were screening and looking at preservation, the Donnell Media Center created a film library that is pretty unparalleled in its mission to take diverse perspectives, marginalized voices, and then pivot and make those works available to any library card holder. That has been the thing we've done, you know, for 50 years and hopefully will continue to do. So following a lot of the more social documentary, a lot of the more maybe strident feminist voices, which are great and good, suddenly here was this film that didn't quite have the same political agenda. It wasn't so overtly feminist in presenting an anti-laundry perspective, because I love laundry. I'm a feminist, I'm a woman. And so here was this work that was compiling all these different perspectives, and it felt gentle and welcoming and joyous. And I felt that it truly celebrated the people in the film, rather than just kind of use them to broadcast, you know, an agenda. And the way that the visuals operated independently with the audio and yet supported it. That was it. This is the way I want to see the world. This is the way maybe I already am seeing the world. I'm a highly analytical person, and the fact that it just demanded my engagement was so revelatory. And then when I discovered If This Ain't Heaven, that was like a whole other level. And it's maybe cute, maybe embarrassing, but then, you know, when I had to make a graduate film project, I just totally cribbed Roberta's style. You know, I just wanted lush imagery. And I wanted to be able to mimic her ability to take the seemingly disparate and combine them to make a whole. And I'm constantly referring to this. And Roberta, you can smack me over the head when next we see each other, but I love montage, and I love montage theory specifically. So the idea of taking two unrelated things to make a third thing is just, I don't know why, but that just seems so perfect, right? It feels like what we do as humans when we create society, when we create culture. And so I just love to see that in art. And so taking something like moss and a man talking about his cat, and combining those things to make a whole that makes sense. Genius. Does that answer your question?
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it does, in a way I've never heard it before. So yeah,
Good. So
now you can ask me.
now I can ask you. All right. So I'm going to pivot over to my list of questions. Let's start with clotheslines. And I'm going to start with, like, you know, the easy softball question. Where or how did you get this idea for a film about laundry?
Okay, that's an easy question. I happen to be working in New York, traveling a lot on elevated trains. I was working for an organization, Theater for the Forgotten, and I needed to go into Queens and the Bronx and Brooklyn and up and around. And very often I ended up on these elevated trains where I was seeing laundry hanging out the window. And, you know, that's not the only place I saw it, but that was the beginning, and it started to evolve from that. Once I'd shot some footage, I really didn't know what I was going to do with it. I mean, I connected it with the sound of the Paco cannon, and it was all very beautiful and evocative, but it wasn't a film. So it was I didn't come up with the idea all at once. It was slowly evolving, and it had a lot of thought involved in it. And the primary thought was the unseen work of women. So these clothes on the line are emblematic of that work that we do not see. Okay, so then now it's a little more formed. And then I broke it into categories. What is it that we don't see? We don't see the pain, the isolation, the agony, the creativity, the folklore, the wisdom, the humor. And I wasn't in touch with all that stuff. I mean, it came to me through the process of first finding and then interviewing participants. And I have to say that when the funds first came in, that's when the terror struck. Didn't know. I mean, oh my God, I haven't made a documentary film before. What am I going to do? And part of it was that I had to figure out that since I was going to be doing a lot of this by myself without a crew, I had a crew maybe 1 or 2 days, and that was just for a little side help. The rest of the time, the audio and the video were recorded completely separately on different days and with different people even. And I did not know when I started that that's how that film was going to come into being, that I was going to bring the images and the audio from different material and make it into a whole. That's basically it.
So this is going to ask a little bit about your process. So then when you start, well, I guess I shouldn't assume, like, did you start with the visual and then had a sense of like, oh, this is what kind of audio information I feel would support it? Or was it not quite so divided?
You know, it's interesting. We talk about the glory of 16mm film and what can be done with it. And in my case, without a crew and without synced sound, one thing was answered. You know, I'm going to collect the video, the imagery, and then I'm going to collect the sound. But how I'm going to put them together was completely unknown and involved an enormous amount of trial and error. So it was trying things out, trying out the audio, one piece of audio with this image. And then the other question was, well, where's the beginning of this film? You know, and I tell you, in the process of editing over, what was it, several years, the beginning of the film had to have changed an enormous number of times. And in a way, I feel like it could have gone anyway. I mean, you know, the way I did begin it was a good choice, but there could have been any number of other good choices. And so in a way that made it, you know, for someone who has a hard time making decisions, it made it especially difficult. And the last thing I can say about this is that although I don't feel like I created this, as I was working, editing, I felt like I was using a circular style of editing. So I would go and return to similar images and bring it back around again some other way. And I felt that was, I liked that about how I was working, that there wasn't a straight line. And that the story was, had more dimensions than one through line.
Did you gravitate towards that style intuitively, or was that, formal film training or film theory?
Nothing from formal film training or film theory, no. The first two films I made in film school, one was, they were both actually narrative films. One was an experimental narrative. But they both had an A, B, and C. They had a direction. This was the first time I'd ever done anything like that. And I don't even, to be honest with you, I don't know where I got the idea, except that some of the elements I had to work with helped a lot, including the person I worked with on the music, Alice Eve Cohen, who used homemade instruments. That was why I was attracted to her. And all of those elements just gave me more materials to work and play with, basically, including then what I think I added last were the sound effects that were outside the realm of the real, the whispers and the whatever else that wasn't the applause, things that weren't in the real situation. But I dreamed them up. I don't know how or why, but it's almost like grew more and more into myself as I was making that film. I had more and more insights about who I was and what it was. Yeah.
I think that's what supports the definition of your film, or assigning your films as experimental works, because there is so much of yourself in them. Like, I don't know that anyone's going to tell Ken Burns that they can see so much of him as a person in his work. We love Ken. We need the Ken Burns style. It's great. But it's so much about you being able to communicate your vision of the world, your experience of the world, so that others may be not only privy to that, but perhaps can unlock, as you did for me, a way of interacting and engaging with the world. And the layering of sound, again, the layering of sounds and images that are seemingly completely unrelated to create something that is whole. I love that process. So then let me ask you, did you feel that you wanted to do something different with this film than had been done before in other works?
You mean, did I consciously set out to do something different?
Yeah. Or new, or not ever done before?
That's a good question. And I don't know how conscious I am about what the actual answer is. I mean, I think there were a lot of things I struggled with as I was growing in my filmmaking career, and holding on to a vision, I think, was one of them. So some of my ideas didn't always get supported, but I had to come to terms with, well, what do I feel? And I think that's the best way I can answer that question.
I think it's
Yeah.
a good answer, like being able to tell a story of laundry and retain a vision through that process.
But I want to also say that when I finished it, the day before I was going to have this screening premiere. I had a screening at the lab, and all of a sudden it was like I was looking at a film I'd never seen before, and I thought it was horrible. And it's so quick, the shots go by so quickly. It's a horrible mess. Oh my God. You know, I have to show up at this place tomorrow and show the film. And that night I had an actual panic attack. I had never had one before in my life, but I knew what it was. And it was only after that, when I started getting, the film was received, that I then could relax into, oh, okay, I guess I did okay putting it together. But I didn't have a sense of any of what came after when I finished it. I mean, not that way. Yeah.
Did you get a sense of it being celebrated or how it was received?
I was overwhelmed with how it was received. Yeah. And I did get that sense. And I was also I mean, I would not have known that it would have been received in so many different camps, you know, not just a single one. I couldn't have known that. Or I might have hoped for it in certain cases, but yeah. And, you know, then there were also the camps that didn't accept it. They existed as well, even with clotheslines.
What? How is that possible? Can I ask, like, who
Well,
would not accept this film?
you know, it's funny, based on the conversation we were having earlier, it was some kind of, and I don't remember the name, so I won't be sharing the name, but it was some kind of formal anthropological festival that rejected it for the most part because the camera wasn't steady all the time.
I mean, Roberta, I have to say, like, you don't need me to comfort you, but like, when I took like my, crappy little graduate school film, which I also alternate between loathing and loving, there's always that person. I think it might have even been Gustav Deutsch, but I was on the stage at the Tribeca Film Festival and he just tore me a new one. I mean, he was like cruel because it didn't follow. It was like, what is this? This amateur film.
Didn't follow what? I don't know the name of this person.
Believe it or not, the rules of the avant-garde or the rules of the experimental. It was too sweet. It was a film about my family's movie theater business. And he was basically saying like, well, who cares, about, yeah, but it also was kind of like, I think it's in a way, I feel like it's good. It means something when you do not have universal acceptance, right? Like it means that you're either challenging those people and making them feel insufficient in their own way, or you refuse to be categorized. And I think that's wonderful that the formal anthropologists reject you. Brava. So, I want to also say before we.
By the way, I got over it.
Yeah, of course. Good. As you should. Before we transition to the dense topic of If This Ain't Heaven, I have to say that what you said about the invisible work of women, like that resonates as much of your film does, but that statement resonates. And the fact that you sought out a way to make that known is so appreciated, because I grew up with this film. I was like 20 when I first saw it. Now I'm in my 40s. And I cannot believe how much I've returned to that idea, if not that statement, of women's work being invisible. Okay, my husband puts a new roof on the house. Bravo, good for you. But I'm putting meals on the table every day, like multiple times a day. And I know that with filmmaking, I don't know how much there is an intersection with that and specifically women independent filmmakers, but I do know that a number of you as a group, as a thing in New York, really, really worked at your craft and took a lot of time and made a lot of sacrifices to make your visions known. I know a woman who literally told me, I chose my film. It took 10 years to make. I chose my film over having children. Like that was not like saying like, oh, but that's just the way it unfolded, And so that is, I think, speaks to tourism and perhaps the challenge of resources being available. Maybe it's just the way it is with all independent filmmaking, but for anyone who doesn't know, making a film that has this much craft to it does not come quickly or easily. Okay, onward. So let us move to, I keep saying this, treating this as if it's like this onerous topic, only because, Roberta, you know, you and I speak endlessly about If This Ain't Heaven. Endlessly, right up until this panel, we're emailing back and forth. Like, is it folklore? Is it, you know, this? Is it that? So let's also try to start this with an easy one. Did you intend to evoke from viewers a particular reaction or response to the film? Because everyone who sees this film does seem to have a strong reaction, not necessarily one that is prescribed. Is that something that you sought to do to kind of provoke viewers?
I was surprised in the way in which people might have been provoked. That was a surprise. And so basically the answer to your question is, was there a particular way I intended for people to respond? I wanted them to appreciate what I appreciated about the man, to feel that to understand that I was celebrating him and who he is and how he interacts with the little bit of the world we see him interact with, because I thought it was very special and imaginative and creative and inventive and artistic in certain ways. And so, yeah, that's that. I'm sharing this ordinary person with you, and I hope you see in him what I see. In the same way I shared ordinary people in Clotheslines, you know, and I was celebrating them, those women. But a lot of people didn't understand the film. I have to say, they didn't get it. It was not the kind of, you know, I mean, you don't always choose your audience. Wasn't the kind of film they were used to seeing in some cases. Didn't know what to make of it. Even the women who ended up distributing the film early on, when they saw the scene of him rolling his hair, using curlers to roll his hair, they wondered, well, does that mean he's gay? You know, like, no, you know, he needs a good afro. That was for the afro. But I don't explain that in the film, so they're left scratching their heads. And there were other things. I think people were taken aback by what was essentially the sensual aspects to the film that made some people uncomfortable. So did I answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. So knowing that the end result is that it's a powerful film, how did you go about creating Mr. G's world? Like, if your mission, if your idea was to simply share this hidden complexity, because for those of you, like, let's just get this on the table. Like, it is not a film about a man and his cat. I mean, it is, but it isn't. And that's why it's so dense and so beautiful. So sure, there are those portrait documentaries that are more literal, right? This is about a man and his cat. But you create this world. You're not just recording his world, you create his world. How did you approach that?
You know, I think my starting point, and for those, there may be people who don't know the film or don't know exactly what she's referring to, which I think is the way in which I integrated images of the jungle or a tropical environment, and, you know, hanging moss and other things that had nothing to do with this man's life in New York. And they were they became an integral part of the film. And it's because I wanted to create the sense of the world that it felt to me that he was creating for his playfulness with the cat, that they entered into it was very private. It was very exotic. It was special in a way that if I were to go to a jungle and get to hear those birds, it would be special for me. But the private thing, I think, is the most important, because it is not a film about a man and a cat, but it is a film that is the private space that the man and the cat occupy. And I think that's what's unusual about the film. We don't usually, I mean, what I do privately, nobody would be especially interested in coming to shoot me, and I'm imagining that might be true for a lot of us. But this private world was very special, and I wanted to convey that. That was my again, interpretation of, and where it came from was the space that he did in fact actually occupy. So not especially beautiful, not studied in any way in terms of home decor. A lot of the furniture was kind of old and kind of dingy and faded, and but they were earth colors. That was the thing, they were earth colors. So I picked up on the earth colors and decided to bring in more earth related things. And then there was also the actual backyard, or outside space that was real.
I think
And
that
and I forgot, it's not only the earth colors of his apartment, it's the earth colors of the cat. They all were one. Yeah.
I think that that's the thing that immediately comes through, is that you are using this outside imagery to share something really intimate. And I think, like, when I show this film to visiting classes of students who are filmmakers or aspiring documentary filmmakers, and they do kind of squirm a little bit, and I'm like, you're squirming, right? Because it's so intensely intimate, and you're trying to figure out, is the intimacy between you and Mr. G? Is the intimacy between Mr. G and his cat? Like, where is all this emotion? You don't know where to tag this emotion to that you're feeling. And I simply say, like, she's documenting sensation. It is the sensation of all these things, of love and of vulnerability. How do you, actually use it as a teaching tool? Like, how do you document something that is not a physical, that is ephemeral, that's not physical? How do you document a sensation? Well, this is how you do it. The scene of the beach. Well, how did that come about? How did you get that idea?
I don't think it was a one single idea. I think that I was attracted to what I could do with high contrast film on a beach, so that we saw these figures on the beach, black against white, and they, depending on what you're shooting, it can evoke a lot of different things. So that was one intention. I want to get some of that kind of footage, and I used it in another film as well. I mean, not the exact same footage, but that idea. In the case with him, this precise decision, I don't actually recall. But it's very possible that the very day that I went to do that shooting, I asked him to come to the beach with me. And since we're there, I might as well shoot him too. And he was not opposed. And then I also got a shot of him taking a nap on the beach blanket, and integrated that. I mean, that's how it evolved. It wasn't any more formal than that. I didn't have to, explain my intentions to him. But I can tell you again, following up with something we discussed before, you have a reaction to the part of him in the beach where he's either going in or out of the water and has his hands raised. And I want you to say your response to it, because then I have something to say to you about it.
Okay, well, I feel that that scene is an emotional climax in the film, because your intuition, whether you are on a mission to present him, as this very private, intimate, personal person or not, this is the scene that to me absolutely makes visual that privacy. Because, and I've written the phrase that I adore, I'm sure, like, it's never good when an author says, oh, I love the way I wrote this, but I have said that he is a supplicant in the midst of the
Infinite.
It's bad when you blank on your own. And to me, that's really important, because we've spoken, you and I, about how you were able to make a space for an African-American man in New York to be something other than how others, especially white filmmakers, white audiences, would want Black men, the urban Black man, to be. And you allowed that space. And then when we talked yesterday, I always thought it was Coney Island, but no, you're at Jones Beach. I mean, what is the more white space, Coney Island or Jones Beach? Jones Beach. So he's already a very personal person. He's in his bathing suit. He's in this very white space that is Long Island beaches. And yet, look how joyful he is and freeing. And when he approaches the water, or is approaching the beach, coming out of the water, his body language to me is so open and vulnerable to, yes, the infinite. And it's just, if anyone could portray me in that way, as an epitaph, I would be thrilled.
You know what? I thought a little more, Elena, about whatever we were talking about the other day with regard to this scene. And one thought that occurred to me, which I do believe is true, is that this may have been his first foray into the ocean water. That may have been completely new for him. And I think there's what you're referring to as the vulnerability is a certain childlike innocence that is conveyed too.
The freedom to be joyful in this world, or in the early 80s, is something that if you can capture that on film, that needs to be preserved for certain. Should we do Q&A? I feel like we should now pivot and maybe
Well, we should. Okay. I just want to say one last thing, itty bitty thing. Okay.
Go for it.
So, because when I was thinking about doing this with you, I thought, it's interesting. The film Clotheslines talks a lot about things that are sad in women's lives. The chores and the agony and everything else that went with it, and the failed marriages and whatever it was. But people don't walk away from that film saying, oh, that was really a sad film. Makes me sad. No, that's not what they come away with. And yet those sad things are in the film. I did not intend to put anything sad in the film about Mr. G, but people come away with a feeling of sadness. And it's just interesting to me, because it's not what I intended. And the realization that you can't be in control of what people get from a film. Okay, that's what I wanted to say.
Well, okay, and then I will zip it and let our audience ask questions. But I think that those people need to really demand from themselves a closer inspection of the difference between solitude and loneliness. It is a person who is in solitude, but not lonely. And I see only the joy in him being able to get from a city that could crush you. There have been people in all kinds of literature and films about how you can die of loneliness in a city of 8 million people. But I don't see his existence as being lonely or sad. The fact that he takes joy from a ventriloquist act, he feels really good about the work he does that he's paid for. He has a great philosophy on life. And I see him as being the ideal New York City dweller, you know? And that's why I think, like I've spoken to you about how I would love, I think Mr. G is the Manhattan's everyman, the ideal one. Okay, filmmakers,
Right.
over
I
to
see
you.
one question in the chat. Oh, it's not a question.
Could I make a quick follow-up comment?
Sure.
I want to say that I related to Mr. G, and I felt like Mr. G. I thought, this is the type of life I lead. I have a very singular, intense life, creative. I think Mr. G is creative. Everything, all the details in his life and his intimacy with the cat. And I thought you framed it so beautifully. It's, if people go away with sadness, it's the fact that we're singular creatures.
The fact that what?
That we all die. And that the idea that we all, like when he said the cat, I thought that was so intimate. It's so intimate and personal. The cat that was dying of leukemia wanted him to take the cat to the vet, and he did. I thought that was so personal and intimate and touching. It's a very, like, exquisite film. The other thing I want to say, the soundtrack by Alice Cohen. Alice Cohen's an incredible composer and and she makes incredible films too. So I think your collaboration, or I don't know if you think of it as collaboration.
Yeah.
Added emotional resonance as well. Just comments.
Yeah, thank you.
I could say, like, I guess I should speak about the importance of film preservation, being about, you know, an archivist. But like, you know, the thing that I love about film is it's a pain in the butt to work with. I don't think, Roberta, you will deny the fact that this was kind of challenging as a medium to deal with film as a physical thing. And yet, being that it is a very hardy medium, that we, many decades after the film's making, could use it as a master to create new film materials, to create new digital materials, is wonderful, so that the film can survive and go on. But also, if you think about, Mr. G has passed, and with this work, he will be immortal. He will live on indefinitely. And so that is kind of what's especially gratifying about preserving this type of work, is that, first of all, I can't imagine it not existing in its original film form, because it's so, both films are so visually rich, and even the grain, the idea of trying to take the grain out of these films is horrifying. So the fact that they can be so aesthetically rich and we can preserve that is great. But also, if you think about the subjects and them being preserved as well, is very motivating. Okay, questions?
So both films are about showing us what we don't usually see, the best reason for art. Yeah. Yeah. Or at least, I mean, I think of myself as trying to present things that aren't, that they're usually seen differently. Clotheslines is a perfect example. Yeah, I remember people saying, what do you want to make a film about laundry for? You know, so with the intention of showing something else, you know, that they weren't seeing. But thank you. That's a nice comment. What we don't usually see or understand. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a thread in my work, actually. So come on, you guys, another question.
Can I speak?
Oh, all right. Why not?
Talk my question, speak my question.
Speak it.
Hi, Roberta. You know who I am,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yes.
Yes. I am a big fan of Roberta's and specifically the Clothesline film because I have been and still am a clothesline historian and hobbyist and give talks. I've been collecting artifacts and all sorts of images that bring back memories of the clothesline, especially for older folks who use the clothesline. And I speak and give talks and presentations. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, by the way, to the folks around Ann Arbor on the love, lure, and lore of the laundry line. And I've used Roberta's film in my presentations. So I have lots of folks' reactions and responses to the film, as well as to everything to do with clotheslines.
Can you say something about how many items are in your collection? It just would be interesting.
Thousands, but they're not all valuable antiques. There's a certain portion of them that have to do with the materials used in hanging clothes years ago. But I have thousands upon thousands of pictures of representations of the clothesline in all sorts of art and artifacts, in literature and in poetry, in people's writings and people's essays and stories that they've shared with me, letters from about 40 years worth of my collecting this stuff.
Wow.
It's a lot. It's really a lot. So I could just watch that film a million times over. I just love it. When I first discovered it, I was so excited. And I've been in touch with Roberta over the years, here and there, to share things. My question is, how many years did it take you to make that film?
Good question. I received my first and basically only grant from the New York State Council on the Arts in 1978. And I finished the film at the end of 1981. But boy, I must have been working on it before then because that doesn't feel like very long. And it did feel like I was working on it for a really long time. So, but maybe it's the other films that I worked on longer and not that one. It's hard to keep track. I should be able to tell you though. Yeah, I was, maybe it would have been 3 or 4 years. I think that's accurate. Yeah.
I never would have thought how much time it takes to put something like that together.
Right. And it's not, nonstop, 8
Yeah,
hours a day working on the one thing. Yeah.
right. But now you're thinking, I assume, about people's reactions in the 80s when people saw that film. And now people in the 2020s, the people that I'm showing that film to are looking at it quite differently. Along the years, have you kept track of what the response has been?
Not really. Well, I mean, I've collected the responses. I haven't been keeping tabs on them or keeping track. And, it's interesting. The film was hissed at one time.
Hissed?
Hissed.
Really?
Yeah. I wasn't there, but I was told that it was a screening that someone else attended. And the majority of the women, they were women in the audience, the majority identified as radical feminists, and they hissed. Too romantic. They thought it was too romantic. Most recently, there was a response that went something like, how did you get hold of all that archival footage? Because now through today's eyes, you look much, that material looks much older. It looks more archival.
Right. Now you updated and colorized it, didn't you? Somewhere not too long ago?
No, it wasn't colorized. It was preserved. The film was
Okay.
preserved, and in that process, there was certain amount of color correction, but it wasn't to
Oh.
change what I had done originally. It was mostly to get it correct to match the original.
Okay, okay. I can tell you that you said you never intended it for it to be sad. Some reactions I recall as people were leaving my presentation were, it did make them feel sad. I think maybe more nostalgic, because the audiences that I appeal to around this part of the country are older people, 60s and beyond, mostly 70s, 80s, who remember the days when they lived exactly what you filmed. Or
Right.
their mothers and grandmothers were doing these same tasks. And it pulled at their heartstrings, I think, to think back.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and there's the ending line. It was so many years ago, but I could still weep over it.
Mhm.
So yeah, the sadness is in there. But I think that
Mhm.
in general, I think there's a sense of whether it's relief or satisfaction that that story has been told, which makes it not be so sad.
Mhm.
I mean, if it's your mother who's talking about, I can still weep over it, that may be a different thing.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
I feel, if I could, like, I feel that some of the emotion that comes up is, for me, like a sense of how close we come as a people to not documenting this particular aspect of our lives that is so human. Like the way you present it, you present these women as artists, you know, the ones who talk about how they arrange the clothes on the line and teasing out so many details of the human and female experience. To me, I'm saddened by the idea that it's only through this one opportunity that they get to be regarded and revered as artists.
Mhm. Yeah.
Just like, are we the only ones who get to think about Mr. G in a certain way? You know, as someone who is, you know, the guardian, the ultimate guardian of cats, and, you know, all these wonderful things about him. It's like this sensation almost of panic of like, my goodness, if not for this opportunity, we would never get to know so deeply and so wonderfully this one person or this one aspect of themselves.
Is there anybody else who wants to voice a question or a thought? There you go. All right. MM, do you have do you mind if we just do this question and answer and talk?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought we were running out of time.
No, go ahead. You can ask the question, Joyce-Ree.
Okay.
Hi, Joyce-Ree.
Hi. Very quickly, clothesline was something that Roberta showed us when she came to Los Angeles. And she joined this group of editors. And the day that she hosted the meeting, she showed clotheslines. And I thought, this is a woman I want to work with. So let me start with that introduction. I'm going to put you on the spot, Roberta. Did you feel after coming to Southern California that you had lost something of that filmmaker that you were in New York?
What an interesting question. That is a really interesting question. I lost something, definitely, but I don't know if I would put it in terms of that I lost something of myself as a filmmaker. I mean, there were other films that had come since that were not celebrated as much as that film had been. And then I still did continue to work on films, and they're not like these two films. I mean, maybe one of them might be kind of in that category. but I guess I just kept moving on. I don't know what else to say. You know, I know that Elena has emphasized that she feels these two films in particular are masterful, which implies that the others may not be. and that, and that you know, you just gotta take it, whatever. You know, despite the fact that I might have worked on them for more years than I worked on Clotheslines. Maybe, you know, I lost my touch along the way. Who knows?
I think though it's like in the same way that you talk about you can't choose your audience. Like there's I don't think that they're masterful or more so than your other works. There's just some other component. I say the same thing about Martin Scorsese's early works. You know, like not every Scorsese film do I think is a masterpiece.
Of course.
So there is this other energy. Maybe it was the energy of New York in the late 70s, you know, or some other thing, youthfulness, who knows? So I don't think it's like, and I don't know, that's just not, it's not qualitative. It's not something that, you know, anyone can debate me on this. You know, it's just also my emotional response. I've attached through all of the disparate things that went into my viewing of these films. So it's not even that the film's like, you know, well, it checks, you know, it scored 99 points on this, you know, and the editing was great here. It's not masterful because your brush strokes were excellent. You know, it's because, you know, also I saw them when I was young and in the city and it was summer and I, you know, it's just all of these things you can't control.
Yeah.
That I think like that's what, and if I may, that's what I think filmmakers, the creatives who have gravitated towards digital formats, they always hope to harness and control all the elements of the creative process, and you never will. So it's kind of like you can, you know, isolate and again, control. I feel like that digital filmmaking is very much gives more control over the formal elements of filmmaking in a way that film doesn't allow for. And there's always that attempt, there's always that striving towards the control to more perfectly communicate what you are seeing as a creative. But if you don't allow the work to breathe and be influenced by these other abstract things, then you're really missing an opportunity. And so these two, the fact that you have two of them that do that breathe life into and take life from whatever is happening in the moment that you made them, in the place that you made them, I would feel very good about that, Roberta, that you have two films that manage that.
I didn't mean to suggest that there was something wrong with the ones she made when she came to Southern California. I just
But they are different. But they are
they're
different.
And whether you see, if you feel somehow that was a loss, I don't, but I'm asking you.
Oh, well, no, the loss was more in terms of, you know, life choices, not about my filmmaking. I mean, you know, I left friends behind and memories and, you know, my youth and that's what I think about in terms of that move. Not, oh boy, I really did a number on my filmmaking. I don't think about it that way. But I do want to say one last thing myself, which is that it's interesting to me because a lot of thought, a lot of thinking has been stimulated. I mentioned, excuse me, Mr. G and his home, his solitude, this private space, and that may evoke some sadness for someone. But you know, I think when I made these films, there I was alone in my private space, interacting with the computer or the steam deck or whatever it was, spinning straw into gold. And not only would it not have been as interesting to have a film depicting that, but I don't know that it would have, I mean, would it have, that's a question. Would it have evoked feelings of sadness for me, for my aloneness? Because actually, when you made that remark about the woman who knew that she was choosing to finish a film that was going to take her 10 years as opposed to having a child, well, that's a part of the decision to, continue working in film. There's certain things I had to give up. Maybe not everybody does, but anyway, I just think it's interesting when I think about, in his own way, his interaction with the cat, he's spinning straw into gold. And in my own way, I was spinning straw into gold. But his way makes a more interesting film. And also, I don't know, is it the loneliness different? The solitude, is that different? I don't know. Do my friends look at my life and say, oh, so sad, so much solitude?
Yeah. I asked because you made that film about Steve, who is interesting in a different way. I don't know if
Right.
other people have seen that film, but
Yeah,
but
we
there's
can
a
talk
lot
about
of
it.
there's a lot of solitude there too, but in a
Exactly.
very different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and then there's a comment that was made to me many, many years ago. In fact, I had shown If This Ain't Heaven in the Soviet Union. And one of the comments was, that film could not have been made by someone who didn't share the sense of solitude that's in that film. I mean, that was a very perceptive thing to say, I thought.
Yeah, thank
So-
you. That's beautiful.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that I have some friends here. My friend Rachel Martin and Tom Briette, my friend Susan Messer, Joyce Lee Hart, Elena Rossi Snook, and Ann Lawrence. Thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. I feel blanketed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roberta, and thank you, Elena. This has been absolutely wonderful. Just like so fascinating to hear you guys speak. And had to run to get an award actually, but she wanted me to thank you both as well. It's just been great.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure and
It
so
was
much
great.
fun, all the leading up to it. So much
Yeah.
fun.
But yeah, watch Roberta's films on our Vimeo on demand. They're amazing. But great.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you,
We're
everyone.
going to look forward to the tape, the edit, the record.
You all let know when it comes out.
Great.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.